Senators, we'll continue with our reconvene with our new witnesses. With us here by a video conference from Kamloops, British Columbia, is Dr. Laura Lamb, Associate Professor, School of Business and Economics, Thompson Rivers University. And here in the room with us is Kayla Smith, a student at the Faculty of Law at the University of Windsor. Well, welcome to both of you. We're going to start with Dr. Lamb. As you know, we've given everyone indication we'd like no more than 10 minutes if possible, and then we'll go to questions, and we'll try to get as many rounds of questioning in as possible. So, Dr. Lamb, the floor is yours.
Oh, yes, okay. A research partner and I, Dr. Hussain, have published about 5 papers related to charitable giving in Canada over about the last 10 years. And we specifically hone in on the effectiveness of the tax credit. The paper that I was asked to comment on was one of our more recently published papers, where we were looking at the effectiveness of the tax credit system, the current system, on encouraging larger donations. And we also wanted to look at the effectiveness of the tax credit system compared to other factors that also motivate people in terms of the decision to make a charitable donation and the amount of the charitable donation. So I'll summarize our results. I'll keep this fairly brief and then open it up to questions. So we use data from the 2010 Statistics Canada survey, the Canadian Survey on Giving, Volunteering and Participating, with a target population of Canadians age over 15 from all provinces across the country. So the sample size is around 14,000. So it's a fairly significant sample. And our main results are that the tax credit as a reason for donating is statistically significant. And those who state that the tax incentive is important to them are more likely to make a larger annual donations than those who don't. So consistently and in sync with other research, the tax credit does always seem to come up as being a significant variable. But what we do find is that other demographic variables, such as income, higher education, and wealth, as proxied by age, also have a significant impact on the amount of charitable donations. And in fact, the strength of the effect tends to be larger for those demographic variables than they do the tax credit. Just give a little bit more detail. So another aspect we looked at in this survey was the 2 tiers of the tax credit system. As you know, a lower tax credit for donations up to $200, and then a higher tax credit for donations over $200. And we found that for those who state that the tax credit is important for donations, they are more likely to give over $200 a year. So it indicates that the upper tier has a more significant effect on giving than the lower tier tax credit. In terms of impact, for households with incomes of $40,000 or greater, an increase in income has a larger impact on the amount of their total annual donations. So that's significant. And then if you look at those with household incomes of $100,000 or more, they are about 30% more likely to make a larger donation greater than $200, say, compared to those with lower incomes. So the income effect is quite significant, and our statistical results suggest that it plays a larger role in determining the amount that people donate compared to the tax incentive. The other effect we looked at was education, and specifically post-secondary education. So Canadians with post-secondary education, just the fact that they have post-secondary education indicates a larger donation and a larger likelihood to donate more. So it plays an important role in the amount of donations. And then the third demographic factor that we looked at that appears to have a larger effect than the tax credit is wealth. And the variable we use to proxy wealth is age, and it shows that those 65 plus are about 30% more likely to make donations, total donations over 200. I'm sorry, over 400 a year, over 500 a year. So in terms of the impact, it appears that wealth, income, and post-secondary higher education play very significant roles in the decision to make a donation, and then also in the decision of how much to donate. And the tax credit does play a part, but the value of the part, or we'd say the marginal effect of the part, seems to be smaller. Other variables that are significant, and these have been found in other research as well, and in other research that we've done, are variables such as volunteer status. So people who volunteer their time also tend to give more money. They tend to have a complementary relationship. Female gender, so females tend to donate more. Also those with school-age children tend to give more, and those who participate in religious organizations and religious attendance also do as well. So these variables have found to be significant in the past. So regardless of how much the tax credit is examined, most research does show it to be statistically significant factor influencing both the decision to donate and the amount to donate. But there are a number of other factors that play a bigger role. I also wanted to comment that in a couple other papers we've done that's not in this current paper, we have broken down donations by sectors. And when you break out religious donations compared to all others, if you call them religious donations and secular donations, there seems to be differences there as well. And in some past research, we found that the tax credit plays a much smaller role in donations to religious organizations as opposed to donations to secular organizations. In terms of this most recent research, we feel our results are actually fairly conservative because they're based on people answering the question about what are their motives and what are their reasons for giving. And people are given about, I think they're given about 5-6 different choices. There's a concept in survey research called social desirability response bias. And it's the idea that people like to give answers to make themselves look good. So people are actually more likely to not mention the tax credit and more likely to mention reasons such as it's a cause that they believe in, or they have compassion towards those in need, or they want to make a contribution to those in the community, which are all very good, sound reasons. But there tend to be a survey bias where people are more likely to choose those reasons rather than state the tax credit. So I'll leave that there, and then you can ask any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lam. We'll now go to Kayla Smith for her presentation. Kayla?
Hello, Senators. Thank you for having me here today. So I'm here to share my findings and personal experiences in the charitable sector as a millennial. So it has been said that millennials do not give to charity, but I am of the opinion that that is not true. And I would like to share a two-streamed approach that I wrote about in a blog for Imagine Canada last summer called The Why and How of Millennial Giving, which I believe will help us to better understand and increase millennial engagement within the charitable sector. So the first part is a values-based approach, and it focuses on the why. And the second part highlights practical tools that focuses on how to strengthen the nonprofit giving relationship with millennials. My research stems from the Millennial Impact Project. It's a US-based organization, as well as the 30 Years of Giving report by Imagine Canada. So the first approach looks at 3 values. I want to draw out authentic inspiration being the first one, transparency being the second, and sharing impact being the third. For authentic inspiration, I believe that millennials they value meaningful connections, and they're more likely to give when we are moved by an authentic story. So I believe that we are compassionate and an empathetic generation, and largely driven by a belief in a cause rather than sometimes by a specific organization. So when nonprofits are genuine about their cause, then that can provoke a sincere desire for millennials to get involved. The second being transparency. So it is true that millennials do not necessarily have as much to give at this point of our lives, given tuition fees, student debt, and so forth. But this is why I believe it is critical for millennials to be able to see and trace where their money is going and how they're able to make tangible contributions. And building trust, I believe, is very important with millennials because that will be able to turn millennial earning power into future giving later on. Lastly, the sharing impact. So millennials, we can be a very results-driven generation, and I believe that this is why it's important for us to see, again, the evidence of our impact. And technology has allowed millennials to widely and rapidly share impact stories on various social media platforms, and this sparks a domino effect in cause engagement. So if I may share a personal experience, last summer when I went on an international missions trip, I not only was passionately led to donate my financial resources to the host organization, but also time, energy, and service. And that was because I was authentically inspired by the cause, and I was able to trace and share the impact of my donation. For the second part, when we look at fundraising tools, I would like to also highlight 4 giving mediums for your consideration. So in the blog, I spoke about mobile payment services. Just about every millennial has a smartphone or two, and we believe that mobile-friendly is very millennial-friendly because it enables convenient and efficient giving. The second being online and social giving. Millennials definitely rely on social media, social websites, search engines, and instant access to technology. And so the report shows from Imagine Canada that our generation actually leads in participatory engagement and initiatives that are supported online. The third being monthly giving, and this one ranks a little bit lower in strategy. However, it does produce stability by allowing smaller gifts, but that are more recurring. And then the fourth one looks at birthdays, holidays, and special events. More recently, millennials have been asking for donations in lieu of gifts for their birthdays, weddings, special events, and this can be definitely a new strategy that we can continue to implement. So I want to leave 4 recommendations for you to consider. The first being alternative giving. I believe that it's important to leverage the professional skills and the expertise of millennials to facilitate alternative giving. We need to remember that giving is not only financial, and millennials in particular can give beyond financially, again, considering time and energy and resources. Millennials being the most educated generation, and so we have a lot of those expertise that we can definitely use. The second being investment. I believe that it's important to invest in the youth nonprofit sector to advance deeper involvement, networking, and ongoing leadership. And the third being inspiration. So highlighting the causes, the movements, the social issues that a given organization actually supports. And the last being trust and transparency, again, in technology. When we capitalize on technology, we can then engage millennials in a very tangible way so that they can see, again, how their contributions are having an impact. Even when it's remotely, they can see it, and we can even do that in schools from a very young age. So in closing, I just wanted to challenge the committee and the sector at large to embrace change for new opportunities, because millennials are definitely changing the way we go about traditional giving, being flexible, adaptable, and innovative to facilitate opportunities for new and different ways to give, and just to continue to engage in dialogues like this today with other millennials to understand more about why and how they do give. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Lamb and Ms. Smith, thank you very much. You both presented thought-provoking presentations, and we're going to get to the question-answer session. I did want to ask Ms. Smith a question. I've been following this up with most witnesses that we have that might have some information on it, is in certain jurisdictions in high school, volunteering and participating in fundraising is mandatory to graduate from high school. Is it in association with your study and with your colleagues at the University of Windsor? Does that yield what I think people were hoping for? Better educated young people who understand the work of charities and who are engaged in both volunteering and giving?
I would say, thank you for your question, Senator Mercer. I would say that definitely is a good start. When I was in high school, it was required to volunteer for a minimum of 40 hours in order to graduate. But I did find that students didn't necessarily take it seriously sometimes and would just try to complete the hours, and it didn't necessarily invoke a desire or care for the charitable sector or to give back. And after that, in post-secondary education, it's not necessary or mandated. And so I would say that is one way that we can definitely get students to start thinking about volunteering. But I believe that from an even earlier stage in elementary school, it would be, I think, very important to get students at an early age, at a tender age, to be able to look a lot more about volunteering and giving back in a way that is not just as a class per se, but looks at the individual and helps them to develop a care for the charitable sector.
Thank you very much. Senator Amdavar.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for both our wonderful witnesses. Thank you so much. Professor Lamb, I have a question for you. I'll make a statement and try and get a response from you. The trend towards increasing charitable giving incentives, such as the capital gains exemption on gifts of property and etc., whilst they may generate more donations by donors, typically most of the donations seem to be concentrated in a certain sector of society. I mean, most of the donations go to universities, hospitals, museums, etc. You have suggested in an article, which a fairly provocative idea, which is that tax credits should be tailored to reflect society's preference and needs by setting unique tax credit rates for the different sectors. I wonder if you would comment on that. Is that a view you still hold? This was 2012, that article that we're citing?
Yeah. A couple studies that we've done definitely show that donations to different sectors respond differently to the tax credits. So based on that behavior that we're seeing in Canadian society, it seems reasonable that different tax credits be set for different types of giving. Now, in terms of practicality, it makes the system more complicated, and it gets into, it is probably very subjective, and and I don't know if it's politically desirable, but the economics of it, the statistical analysis, does suggest that the tax credits have a greater effect on some sectors more than others. And I cited the religious giving as an example, because a couple studies we've done have shown that the tax credit plays an extremely small role in giving to religious organizations as compared to giving to social service organizations or international organizations, or even the health research organizations. So there is a different responsiveness out there that does suggest that information could be used as a tool to try to encourage donations in certain areas.
Could I clarify one thing before and I'll come back to Senator Ondevar. The use of the word tax credit can be a little confusing in the context of charities, because a donation to a charity is a tax deduction as opposed to a credit, and a donation to a political party is a tax credit. It's an actual deduction off of the taxes owed, where deduction works its way through the system and doesn't end up as beneficial as a tax credit that you would get for a political donation. So I just want to ask Dr. Lamb the context in which she uses the word credit.
Well, in our income tax system, the incentive for charitable giving is given as a tax credit rather than a tax deduction. So in other words, a tax deduction in our income tax system is a benefit that's based on your marginal income tax rate. But that's not how the tax incentive is set up. The tax incentive is set up based on a percent credit that varies by province, right? You know, there's two different levels within each province. So in the accounting world, it's considered a credit.
Thank you. Back to you, Senator Ondevar.
Thank you.
I apologize for interrupting.
That's okay. It's good to get our definition straight. I want to thank you, Ms. Smith, for your interest in a sector that I hope engages more young minds like yours. Can you confirm to me, I think I heard you say this, that young people don't actually care about getting a tax receipt? It's the cause that motivates them. Do they therefore care whether their cause is tied to an institution, and whether that institution or organization, smaller or big as it may be, is a charity or a not-for-profit or nothing?
Thank you for your question. So just to clarify, that I did not suggest that young people do not care necessarily about getting tax receipts or tax credits. What I would like to put forward is that millennials are more passionate about causes and social issues that sometimes transcend institutions or organizations and charities and nonprofits. So, for example, there may be multiple organizations, but the actual cause or the movement is what will appeal to millennials, more particularly as a generation than others. So I do believe that sometimes there is a difference, that young people do look at charities versus nonprofits and receiving tax receipts as well. However, so I would not suggest that they do not.
Thank you. Moving on.
Okay, Senator Black.
I asked this question earlier, and thank you for your testimony. I asked this question earlier, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on it. The first one is the idea of first-time donors super credits, which supplemented the value of charitable donations by 25% on donations made by first-time donors. That program expired at the end of this 2017 tax year. Any thoughts, comments on the value and impact that might have had, both from you, Dr. Lamb, and Ms. Smith? Dr. Lamb.
I haven't seen any data on it, so I really don't know how effective the program was. It's difficult to comment because I don't know what type of impact it had. When the policy change was first announced, I didn't suspect that it would have a very significant difference. But like I say, I really, I haven't seen any data on it, so I really can't comment. Sorry.
Similarly, I don't have any data that I can accurately report.
Okay, thank you. My second question centers around or focuses on donor groups. In my home community, I'm aware of two groups in the area that get together once a quarter and bring a check, and it's a group of 50 to 100 people, bring a check to a 2-hour meeting, and they actually have people come in and talk about their not-for-profit or their charitable organization, and then that group of individuals divvies up the money, and it could be as much as $10,000 being given in an evening. So I called them donor groups, and I know of two in my community. Are you seeing that, or seeing this trend, or is it just in my community? Again, both of you.
Yeah, again, I haven't seen stats on that, but that's interesting, and it does tie into some other aspects that I've seen that are significant in terms of charitable giving. And it relates, I guess, to the concept of social capital and networking, and when people do things in groups and are organized in groups and there's sharing and building of momentum. I think some similar research suggests that it does have a positive effect. For an example, adults that are involved in organizations, and they don't even have to be nonprofit organizations, but it can be, just looking here, so for instance, adults who serve on committees, who are involved in group participation of different family and organizations, and people who volunteer do tend to have a higher rate of volunteering. So it suggests that people who are more well networked socially tend to give more. And actually that even goes back further, and that picks up on something that Kayla had talked about earlier, is that my research partner and I did a previous paper on the effect of youth being involved in activities, and our research found that youth, if they were involved in student government or in sports or boys and girls clubs, tended to participate more in charitable giving as adults. So I think that whole kind of social aspect and club aspect's really important. So I think, I think the donor group idea, like I mentioned, I haven't seen any stats on that, but I think it's really interesting, and it's worth further examination.
So based off the research that I have done, I have not necessarily stats on donor groups, but I have looked at the different ways in which young people tend to give more to religious institutions. So what we'll see is more of a rallying around faith groups, so in particular to donor groups, as well as Dr. Lam did point out, schools and clubs. You do see young people with student governments and extracurricular activities giving more, coming together, and particularly raising their volunteerism in that way.
I should tell you, Senator Black, in my community there have been donor groups like that, except there was one group that put an interesting wrinkle to it. Some people came together with and collected the money, and then challenged 4 schools to make the presentation. Not the organizations, the charities, but 4 schools to make a pitch for the money for the cause that they chose. It was I was actually there when the award was made. It was a wonderful presentation. It was very emotional for them, and it was very inspirational to see the work of these young people. And these were quite young students. I'd say the junior high school level. So that was another wrinkle. And okay, thank you, Senator Martin, please.
Thank you both for your presentations, and I was just my question is for Ms. Smith, and I think your insights on millennials and in what ways they're what causes they're passionate about, or you're passionate about, and the priorities that you have, and those insights were very helpful. So I was curious, first of all, in terms of the role of media and how certain issues or causes may be talked about in the news or in sort of traditional media, but I know from my own daughter who doesn't look at the television per se. So I was curious, when you talk about, online giving and social media, are you getting your information from places that are like in the digital world very different from just the regular television medium that we are watching? Can you sort of go into a little bit of detail about how millennials will be, how will you get the kind of information that may inspire you to act on certain issues and whatnot?
Thank you for your question. So as millennials, I believe that we are getting our information in non-traditional ways, social media particularly. So instead of necessarily looking at the newspaper or even the 6 o'clock news on the television, the news that is reported ends up being on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, sometimes even faster than my family members may find out on the television. And I think that is a way that millennials are engaging in meaningful dialogue online about things that are relevant and that are happening today, as well as still taking the news, but just on a digital platform. So I may get the notification sent to my phone, but it's still the same thing that my parents may be watching on TV. So it's a wide array, and it does depend. I don't mean to generalize, because millennials, it's a large category, and some people still do focus on the television per se, but I do know that many young people today are definitely leaning towards social media and gaining their information in that way.
So you did outline, millennial giving and various methods in which you would do that, but would you say the involvement of millennials, and particularly millennials in, say, leadership roles with charities and nonprofit organizations, is the way in which you're generating, funds and or supporting causes, like, would you say it's sort of changing or evolving, and how do we sort of bring the traditional and what you're doing sort of closer together, or make sure that we are able to work together and be really sort of impactful together?
Yes, I think it's about bridging gaps, because millennials are leaning towards the technology. So when charitable organizations and nonprofits make their websites more tech-friendly and implement mobile payment services, for example, on their website, so that young people can give digitally while others from other groups can still, mail in their donation, for example. Or just engaging young people through social media as well, because that is sometimes the number one way that we're going to even come across the charity initiative, instead of traditional door-to-door knocking, for example. So it is bridging gaps, and I believe that charitable organizations and nonprofits can be equipped to do and to make these changes, even by taking on millennials into their organizations to help implement that change.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Duffy, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses. Ms. Smith, I want to get to you in just one second, but before, I'd like to ask Dr. Lamb, based on your research and the fact that you're a member of the staff of the School of Business and Economics at Thompson Rivers University, we have a growing high-tech field here in the Ottawa area, and people who work in charities in this area tell me that they often run into newly very wealthy people in the high-tech field who say, I don't give to charity, I create jobs. They don't have the same culture of giving as old money seems to have, and which the statistics seem to show that the older people are, the more, the larger the amount of money they're likely to give. Are your students in the business school, is that a common view that their job is to go out and build companies and build wealth and leave it up to the employees whether or not they get involved, give, donate?
Yeah, That's interesting. I've done some work for, some consulting work for our local United Way here. And I've seen that happen where you get a fairly good sized company that has a lot of employees. And when the United Way campaign comes out, they encourage their employees to donate, but the company itself doesn't so much. So there could be something to that. I think one of the reasons that the donations is related positively with age is not only age, but it's got to do with wealth accumulation. So maybe some of the younger entrepreneurs are successful, but they're not at the stage yet in their life where they're where they're ready to give. They're using their money and building on it, and I guess we can hope by the time they get to their 50s and 60s that they will change values a little bit and want to be donating and have business schools named after them and such things.
Well, some of us have had a tap on the shoulder from heart disease, and there's nothing like having a heart attack to make you appreciate the importance of giving to your local hospital or whoever provides your health care. So that's also a function of age, I think. Kayla, what about your colleagues? Do they all want to be like you, or are some of them just saying, I'm too busy trying to build my future and I'll look after that later?
Thank you for your question. Well, I just would like to say that I too fall into these traps as well. When you are a student, it's a difficult age bracket because you're trying to focus on your academics as well as extracurricular opportunities and professional development. And so I think that millennials in particular are in a unique space because they know that they do need to give back in order to sometimes secure their ideal career. However, we are always pressured with grade point averages and scholarships and things that require a lot of time. And so I would say that it varies, that a lot of millennials kind of fight that battle between how much time do I have and then how much money do I really have to give. I could be working, saving money, putting that towards my obligations. And I also have been there as well. I think it's wonderful when schools are able to create balance so that you understand the importance of still getting involved in your local communities while still pursuing your academics. And I found that to be my experience at Windsor Law, where social justice is our focus and we're not streamlined into just focusing on academics, but again, getting involved in social justice advocacy.
That's excellent. A few years ago, there were pieces written, maybe 20 years ago now, that predicted intergenerational conflict as we baby boomers got old and went off to the retirement home, and we were counting on your generation to pay the bills for us. Do you see that now, that part of your generation is saying it's not our job to look after the old folks? To put it in the vernacular.
It's a complex question, and so what I will say is there are layers to that. There's a cultural element there as well, and so I would not necessarily think it would be right to just answer it from a perspective of the charitable sector. I think that there are a lot of other factors that are increasing millennials in terms of wanting their parents to take care of what they need to take care of and then focusing on themselves. There has been claims that we tend to be entitled and we focus on ourselves. But I think that there are a lot of other factors that we would have to look at to really be able to say whether or not.
Dr. Lamb, do you have anything on that, intergenerational conflict, how we're going to build these bridges? Because when one looks at the national balance sheet, there's no way that this is sustainable.
Right. Yeah, like I said, two things come to mind, and one is, I guess, for the important role of immigration, because Canadian fertility rates are low, and when we look at the dependency ratios are getting high, right? You know, in terms of the number of young people who are going to be paying income taxes and contributing towards CPP. Relative to those who are going to be collecting. So that's one aspect. Another aspect that comes to mind is a lot of literature that's been published recently about how parents are financially supporting their children longer than they used to. So there's been shifts in the dependency ratio in the other sense too. You know, you talk about the late launchers, and part of it may be related to real estate prices, or different aspects out there. So those are a couple factors that come to mind.
Thank you.
Quick last question to both of you. We've heard some discussion here in committee around the need for someone in Canada, preferably someone who has policy levers and financial levers at their disposal, to be the champion and ambassador for charities, so that more people are aware of the good work that charities do. I wonder if you could respond, both of you, would that help?
It can help. I know that millennials, or I'll speak for myself, when being able to associate somebody or a person in particular with a mandate, we tend to be looking for evidence, results, and when there's one person who can hold a portfolio and we can look and analyze and trace data, I think that can be beneficial and can impact young people to potentially want to be more involved, knowing that it is a priority, it is a focus, and it's not left in a broad sense, but it's something that we're actually focusing on specifically. So I would say that it can.
Soleil?
I think there is a role for that. Yes, absolutely. I think on a couple different levels. One would be to raise awareness of need. I sometimes think that there's a general perception out there that that the government looks after more than it does actually. In terms of donations and social services and those type of aspects. So I think that the awareness of need is important. Another aspect would be to dispel myths about the nonprofit sector. You hear some people as an excuse not to give or not to give more talk about them not being so sure that the money's going into the right place, or too much spent on administration costs, when they go towards paying high salaries and that type of stuff. So I think some good information out there, so some good quality factual information would benefit. And also in relaying information, and to start educating children and youth. So rather than focus on just the current adult population, to look at future givers. I think that lots could be done to raise more aware, more giving citizens for the future.
Colleagues, thank you all for your questions. Dr. Lam, thank you for your presentation and your participation. We appreciate your time. And Kayla Smith, thank you. You added an awful lot to this conversation. It's good to see it that we're finally being led by the young people on this debate. So thank you very much for your time, colleagues. We stand adjourned.